Does the name of Jesus mean Hail Zeus? No, it does not. Don't listen to anybody out there proclaiming such nonsense. Most of them are Hebrew roots. I myself am of the Hebrew roots, but I am not an illiterate. And this is how you tell the difference between somebody that is self-taught and somebody that actually has the education to talk about these things. So a lot of people, they hear something and then they just spit it out. And that's the same thing with the name of Jesus. It does not mean Hail Zeus. It doesn't even sound like it as far as the Greek goes. Because in the Greek itself, it's Halazi Zeus. That's how you say Hail Zeus. That is specifically how you say it. Now in English, Hail Zeus, Jesus doesn't sound anything like that. The only one you could say does is Jesus in Spanish. But Jesus sounds like Jesus, which means Jesus means Hail Zeus. That doesn't make any sense. You're using another language's different application of the same letters to identify something in English by the Greek. That makes no sense. Nobody takes the Hebrew word sefer, which means book or scroll, and says, oh, in English that sounds like suffer. So in Spanish it means to suffer, sufrir. And it's like, wait a minute, sefer, sufrir, suffer, sefer, what? We don't do that because that doesn't make any sense. But they do it for the name of Jesus, which doesn't make any sense, and it makes them look very dumb. But it also gets people really angry, and rightfully so, because somebody that is literate in Greek and Hebrew will tell you that doesn't make sense. And that person does not know what they're talking about, whoever claims Hail Zeus. Alexander Hislop is actually the person who started this, and he made a lot of weird connections, as many people, do today, who try to be in the scholarly world, people that are actually in the scholarly world, where they'll take a Greek word that means to heal and apply it to something else, and then therefore the way the Bible uses it is mystical and related to witchcraft or something like that. And they, they're not entirely wrong, but again, it depends on what is being said. So just to cut it all very short, the name comes from the Greek. The name itself is modernly they pronounce it as Yehoshua, but if you look at the letters that are spelled, this is how the Hebrew roots would pronounce it, Yahusha, because there's an extra there. It's simply Yod, He, Vav, Shin, Ain, Yahusha, right? But they pronounce it Yehoshua when they start putting in the vowels in between the letters. We would properly know it as Yahusha, which a shortened version is to remove the He, and it's Yahshua or Yeshua, modern terms. And from there, we see Yeshua as a shortened name from Yahusha. So it's early identified in the Old Testament itself, and even one of the priests, specifically priest number 9, in David's 24 division cycles. His name is Yeshua. Now, when the Greek translates these names, they use the word Jesus. So that's where most of that comes from. And Joshua and Jesus are written in Greek as Jesus. Now, for those of you that don't know, look at the New Testament, and most of the names like Mattathias, Judas, Jesus, and many others in the New Testament have S's at the end of their names. And that's because that is a Greek thing to do to make a name masculine. Even if you look up the word Jacob, which in the Bible is spelled Jacob with a J, but if you look up the Greek behind it, it's Jakobos with an S at the end. So James himself is Jakobos, Jacob from Hebrew, Jacob. In the Greek New Testament, you can see it very clearly in most of the people's names that end with an S. So that's why Jesus has an S at the end, because otherwise it would just be Yesu. And Yesu sounds very similar to Yeshu, right? So Yeshua, Yesu, but you can't leave it like that. You have to have that S. So Yeshua turns to Iesus. Now the problem is where the English comes from is not from the Greek, but from the Latin. Well, the Latin gets the name Iesus from the Greek Iesus. So the Latin is the reason we pronounce it Jesus. Because in King James 1611, it's Iesus, not Jesus, Iesus. That's from the Latin. So that's why we have the name Jesus. So Jesus comes from Iesus, which comes from Jesus, which comes from Yeshua. And that's all that it is. Just like Jacob got turned into Jacobos, which got turned into Jacob. And even worse, James in our English, knowing very well that the name is Jacob. So that's just another name as well that was roughly changed around because it's all based off the Latin and Greek, when we have the letters in English to go straight back to the Hebrew and pronounce them exactly how we want to. And so the Hebrew New Testament manuscripts, at least the coaching series, always spells it Yeshu. For Aramaic purposes, it's a shortened way of Yeshua. But none of the manuscripts themselves have Yahusha as the name of the Messiah, except backwards Hebrew translated from the Greek. And that's why. Because if you simply just backwards translate Jesus from Greek to Hebrew, you're going to get Yahusha every single time, which is Joshua. But if you don't do that and you have Hebrew, you can interpret Yahusha from Yeshua. You can have both names, which is what happens in the Old Testament. So that's why it's actually important to have the Hebrew. But nonetheless, and none to fear, the name of Jesus does not mean to hail Zeus. Shame on all you Hebrew root illiterates in both Hebrew and Greek and Latin, because somebody that actually studies these languages would simply prove you wrong. It's very simple and it's very easy. So don't listen to them, guys.